This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Happy Halloween.
It's an absurd holiday.
Oh yes, putting on costumes and striking fear. Quite absurd.
Halloween in Gotham is the perfect time for revenge.
What's happened?
Johnny Beatty was murdered tonight. And only the Dark Knight can unmask the killer. Nice outfit, Bats. Batman, the Long Halloween. Trick or treat.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 183 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, and the man that runs our Twitter page, it is Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 183, also known as a very exciting conclusion to last week's review. First time we've done that in the history of the DCAU Review.
That's right. The movie was released in two parts, though I do believe there will be a complete edition coming sometime in 2022. But as it stands now, since they were released as separate movies, we reviewed them as separate movies, and because the episode would have been 3 hours long if we had to review both those parts in one episode. So yeah, we for our own sake and for the format in which it was released, we are bringing you part 2 of our review of the Batman the Long Halloween animated movie. And this week we are reviewing part 2 of said adaptation.
That is right. And if you're interested in hearing all our thoughts on the original graphic novel on which this is based, where the comic series was actually 13 comics, I believe, in the original series, but it's been collected as a graphic novel over and over and over again. We invite you to join us. I don't know why you would be listening to the part 2 before you listen to part 1, unless you're just one of those sickos that likes to know the end of the movie before the beginning of it or how we get there. But if you're interested in hearing thoughts on that, especially Liam, as we mentioned last week's episode, is a huge fan of this particular comic book and storyline. So interested to discuss with you today, Liam, how it differs, the plot veers off. There were some things that we liked or that specifically that you liked that maybe deviated a little bit from the plot last week. And I know that there are a few things with the movie that ultimately deviate a little bit more this week. So looking forward to discussing that with you. Before we get into our 4 categories this week, though, let's go ahead and get our official IMDb synopsis. And for the movie, the Batman the Long Halloween Part 2, which was released direct to video for streaming also on the wonderful HBO Max app here in the States on July the 27th, 2021, meaning, yep, we're just a few months old here at this point for this movie.
That's right. And this is, of course, the synopsis for Batman the Long Halloween Part 2, which was written by Tim Sheridan, directed by Chris Palmer, with music by Michael Gatt, and animation by, I believe it's Edge Animation Co. for this part as well. And that synopsis reads as such. The killer known as Holiday continues to stalk the Falcone crime family, while a new class of costume criminals rises in Gotham. Batman suspects that a former ally might be the serial killer.
All right, that's okay. I feel like it's a little wordy. I
take some issue with the idea that the costume criminals are just now arriving, because it's pretty established that he's already met all of them because they're all in Arkham.
Valid point.
So maybe he's fought them all one time each, but that's still, I guess this, and that is something that, as we can get into our plot here, that is something that was sort of what the point of the graphic novel was. It was taking Falcone and Maroni and some of those characters from the Batman Year One Frank Miller story and kind of doing a story that bridges the gap where we go away from the mobsters and the sort of the unsuper criminals and sort of the moment when that shift officially happens. And I do think that the movie here does sort of play into that, certainly with its finale. That is sort of the idea, is that yes, these criminals have existed, but now they've really seized the top of the mountain.
Right. You have the criminally insane are the biggest threats at this point, and the older generation is sort of dying off. As you mentioned, sort of the crime organization here. But we pick up Liam where we kind of left off with our post-credit scene, which was Bruce Wayne being introduced to Poison Ivy as a vine sort of began running up his arm, and we learned that for the first 3 months of this movie's holidays, that being Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, and Mother's Day or April Fool's, I forget.
April Fool's Day. So this
April
is
Fool's. Okay.
Yeah, this is sort of the first part of the book series that gets very condensed here, as each month, of course, got its own issue, whereas they kind of just do a quick montage of just to establish that Poison Ivy is in control of Bruce Wayne, and that she's, while controlling him, is getting him to turn over various assets and funding to the Falcone crime empire, which as was established in part 1, is sort of on its last legs and is sort of desperate to find any kind of financial help, as well as we see here. And the other side effect here is that Falcone is beginning to work with these super criminals to sort of keep himself afloat and keep himself alive.
Yeah, that's one of the big things that we learn that is sort of out of character for him, as later on in the movie we're introduced to his daughter also, and we'll talk about her in just a moment. But mainly the first little portion here, as you mentioned, is Poison Ivy has again been manipulating Bruce and having him turn over a lot of control of his various assets over to the Falcone family, and is only actually foiled and stopped the plan as she has begun to literally take over Wayne Manor. It's overgrown and plants have infested Wayne Manor itself, but really only comes to an end thanks to Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman.
You've been a good boy. The Foundation was such a burden to you, to us. Just like the rest of the company. You know what you have to do, so we can be together.
Mr. Wayne, I think you've overfed your philodendron.
I don't know why it took her 3 months to figure out, unless she just had hurt feelings that Bruce all of a sudden was gal palling around with Pamela Isley in public. I don't know.
I think there's a line about how she had to wait until she could approach when Ivy was distracted or something, but they do have some kind of line to explain it, but it's just a throwaway line.
Yeah, it's a throwaway line that didn't make any sense to me. It's like, what does that mean? What do you mean she had to be distracted? What does that mean? But yeah, okay, yeah, you are right. They did say that. So she invades and rescues Bruce and Alfred from the clutches of Poison Ivy. There's a little fight that happens between them, and she's able to successfully free Bruce from Poison Ivy. And he quickly there discovers that he's turned over a lot of assets over 3 months to and lost 3 months of his life.
How did you know?
Well, you haven't exactly been discreet, appearing with Ivy in public and signing assets over to the Roman.
I'll wake the lawyers, sir.
Police will be here any minute. Tell them everything you remember and then get to bed. You look awful.
I told you I don't want a partner.
You sure wanted one these past 3 months.
3 months?
Took a while to catch the jolly green Jezebel with her guard down.
And Holiday?
Still at large.
In the meantime, things are getting bad for one Harvey Dent.
Yeah, and that's I think arguably something that the film does better that we talked about last week here is that it really in similar fashion to the animated series, it's showing Harvey's sort of descent into madness, his descent into psychosis, kind of at the same time, or before he becomes before he's physically scarred. And I think that sort of becomes a very important plot point later in the movie as we sort of see this relationship between him and his wife deteriorate more and more, and he's just he's really in a bad way. He doesn't and it just seems to keep getting worse as and to counter. And in the meantime, we also, of course, we jump to another couple of holidays. We've got Mother's Day, which features a very almost ripped right out of the pages sequence of Batman being exposed to fear toxin and having these terrible hallucinations of his mother and ending up in Crime Alley. Although the way it happens is a little bit different in that he's still Batman in that scene, whereas in the book he had switched back into Bruce Wayne's.
Who helped you escape? Give me a name. All right.
Out of his mind and is just going to the place where he last saw his mother, basically.
And has to be rescued again by Selena Kyle, Catwoman. It was interesting that for like half of this movie, Batman gets his ass handed to him a lot by villains. He's being mind controlled by Poison Ivy, and then he gets exposed to fear toxin and has this hallucination where he ends up in Crime Alley, or the spot where his parents were murdered, as you mentioned, and has to be saved by Selena. Later on in the movie, there's an interaction between the Scarecrow and Batman again, where he gets defeated by the Mad Hatter and gets knocked unconscious. So he's really, I don't know if this is technically supposed to be, I guess, we talked about last week's episode that this was still, I guess, early on in Batman's career, because we know that he's not full-blown detective yet. He talks a lot about having to refine his detective skills. So in some ways I guess it plays into that. He's not the expert. He's definitely not the expert combatant, or he hasn't seen or isn't expecting some of the things that these villains choose to do, and ways that they can manipulate him that you would maybe as a grizzled veteran Batman. But yeah, in the meantime, there's more victims that are murdered, and then after Mother's Day, we have what turns out to be. So the Maroni family is meeting on Father's Day, and the father, I guess it's Luigi Ramone, who we learn was responsible at one point for bringing Thomas Wayne into sort of this pseudo relationship with the Falcone family, because Carmine's father brought Carmine to Thomas Wayne in order to have an emergency operation on him after being shot up by the Maroni family, which is kind of where this rivalry between the two families really kicked off. I mean, it already existed, but became personal at that point, and at that point sort of brought the Waynes into the Falcone Maroni rivalry.
You shouldn't be here. It's okay. Do you know who my father is?
The Roman?
Smart kid. So you know who I'm gonna be.
The Roman.
Very smart. You remind me of my boy. Your pop saved my life. Guess that makes us family.
It fell out of your pocket.
My insurance policy. There's a lot of bad people out there. Criminals. And everybody knows criminals are superstitious. Sometimes all it takes to get out of a bad situation is a good flip of the coin.
It didn't work for you tonight.
Yeah. Still, two heads are better than one. No? Keep it, kid. All we get is all we take.
And Bruce even has a line where he mentions that after helping Carmine and having the surgery done in less than a couple of weeks, the Waynes were murdered in an alley. So seemingly connecting that the Maronis were responsible in some way, or the organized crime certainly was responsible for Thomas and Martha's deaths. But at this time, Luigi's actually assassinated in front of Sal Maroni, and there's a chase that happens as he sees Holiday, chases down after him. And one of the last things that Luigi Maroni told Sal was that he needed to make peace with his enemy. So the very next scene that we get after he's unsuccessful, Sal Maroni's unsuccessful in tracking down the Holiday killer, he decides to go visit Harvey Dent himself in the office, and decides that his father must have not been talking about making peace with the Falcones, but instead making peace with the police and the law. So he's going to flip on and give up information to implicate the Falcone family in order to stave off the police from himself and his own men. So we get this setup sort of where Harvey is going to be able to finally catch the Falcones and really put the screws to them in the legal sense. And that's where we kind of get one of the I guess pinnacle moments of the movie, and ultimately the transformation from Harvey to Two-Face.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic, and they don't do, I don't think, as good a job of establishing it in the movie as they did in the book, and some of that could be chalked up to time, but is that the reason that Maroni flips in the book is, and we do see them together briefly, but is that he is in a relationship with Falcone's daughter, Sophia. Mm-hmm. And specifically, it's mentioned that she went to prison for 10 years to protect Maroni. Mm-hmm. And so they have this sort of, the Romeo and Juliet type romances between these two warring mob families. And she is sort of, as he's about to turn state's evidence, she sort of goes to see him in jail and convinces him to take another tactic, so to speak, which it's kind of they do, like I said, Sophia is there when Maroni's father is killed, but it isn't really made clear, or at least I didn't necessarily, and maybe that's part of the twist, I guess, but that I didn't necessarily see that coming, as without including that scene of them really making it clear that he's gonna flip back the other way. It was when he just pulls out the acid and throws it in Harvey's face. It's pretty dramatic, and I think a little bit unexpected. And I think it is right out of the original Two-Face origin, something that we really hadn't seen done on screen. I guess they did it in Batman Forever.
Yeah, Batman Forever was the only.
You see Tommy Lee Jones, and for some reason Batman's in the courtroom. Batman was on jury duty.
Classic.
But anyway, but yes, we do get the classic Two-Face origin of the mobster throwing the acid into his face, and now he is physically as scarred as he is mentally. And
now, Mr. Maroney, may I remind you that your immunity is contingent upon your truthful testimony during these proceedings.
And I told you the truth. Falcone's clean as a whistle.
Sal, what are you doing?
What I'm told.
Okay. Your Honor, in light of the witness's change of heart, I need to request a continuance.
Continuance? What is that, like a holiday?
What?
You know, like Father's Day. Luigi Moroni sends his regards.
Detain the witness!
You're dead, Holiday! You hear me? Dead! That stuff will eat through concrete!
That sort of coincides with Falcone's sister. Carla has been accusing Dent of being the killer on cable news. We get a very sort of Dark Knight Returns style, cable news pundit, news yell show where Falcone's sister is accusing Dent, and then of course she turns up dead. And at the same time, Dent is, after escaping a few of Falcone's hitmen, ends up down in the sewers, where he happens to run into somebody we saw briefly in part one. That, of course, being Solomon Grundy, and we get, which is something that was pretty much right out of the comic book, as they sort of come to this understanding as they've both sort of died and been reborn in some strange way.
Born on a Monday, as he keeps saying. Gotham hospitals should have thought twice about putting Dent in a room with a window after what happened the last time he escaped custody, under police watch. Man, just terrible Gotham hospital security happening around there. But anyway, he escapes to the sewer, and as you mentioned, he's all signs at this point are pointing. It's very clear that they want you to believe that Two-Face Harvey is Holiday. He even in some ways, his inner dialogue that we see as he sort of begins to flip, it mentally before the acid attack starts to lead you to believe that he is Holiday. There's a scene right before that where Falcone had sent a hitman to provoke Harvey, not to kill him, but to provoke him. And he sort of blacks out and then wakes up again in the sewers, and with a gun, with the Holiday killer's gun there, and blood, literal blood on his hands. The hitman that had been sent after him dead. And him running away, to escape. All the meantime, Batman has begun to put things together and actually finds Holiday killer guns and the baby bottle nipples in the basement of the Dent's house, along with an Oxford pennant, which is interesting because Batman wasn't aware that Harvey went to Oxford, and even asks Jim Gordon if Harvey went to Oxford. And it's interesting because Jim mentions that no, in fact, Harvey was a Gotham U boy. That no, he didn't go to Oxford, but he does mention that there is somebody else that did go to Oxford, and that was Alberto Falcone, which is interesting, and a little bit of a breadcrumb to lead you on later on when we figure out just who Holiday is. But yeah, as Harvey and Solomon Grundy sort of team up, they attack this convoy that we find out is a trap set. They were transporting Sal Maroni, and the convoy is attacked by Harvey, and seemingly Harvey's going to get his revenge and kill Maroni at this point, just before he can. And by the way, we also learned that the coin that Bruce Wayne gave Harvey to flip in part 1 to decide whether or not to burn the money. Not only does it have only 2 heads, it's a double-sided headed coin, but it also originated from Carmine Falcone. Also, it was Carmine Falcone's coin that he ended up giving Bruce the night that Thomas Wayne operated on him. So Bruce was responsible for giving that as Batman to Harvey, and now Harvey is using it throughout the movie, talking about realizing that every time he calls it, he said it can only be heads. Heads, you win. He always calls it out that way. So it's interesting that we kind of learned that. We didn't quite know that in part 1 that I know of. So, but now he's made, of course, the classic Two-Face X over one of the heads to decide the fate of Maroni. And before he can decide the fate of Maroni's actually shot and killed from, of course, the Holiday Killer, who is up in the window. And Batman and Jim Gordon believe this to be intentional, to try and draw heat away from Harvey Dent from being the killer. Harvey is very careful to make sure that he protects Batman, or the Holiday Killer, from Batman chasing after them, and ultimately is led away and taken or escapes. No, he escapes then, doesn't he? He and Solomon Grundy end up escaping in that moment. So that kind of sets us up for our final quarter of the movie here, as we kind of get this culmination between Falcone, who is meeting with his daughter Sophia, who has expressed interest in being a part of the family, but he's been resistant to. But he slowly decided to maybe let her into the family. And at that point, they start to notice that there's multiple explosions across the city happening. And it appears that Harvey has decided to break out the criminals from Arkham City to begin to wreak havoc. And we get more Scarecrow and Mad Hatter, Poison Ivy, and of course the Joker running amok, also with the Penguin, who was previously not seen before in any part of the movie. So
I think you see him in a cell in part 1.
Is he? Okay, all right.
One of the cells in Arkham.
Okay.
You at least see the nameplate. I don't know if you see him or not.
Well, if he does, then he returns. But we didn't get much. He didn't play too big of a part enough to even have a speaking role that we know of in part 1, though. So it's interesting that he pops out there, and that kind of leads us to our final battle here. Is the villains are running amok and leading to this sort of culmination of all at the Falcone mansion.
Yeah, and it's sort of contrasted, as you talked about, with as Falcone is starting to maybe warm to the idea of his daughter, and Catwoman has throughout both part 1 and part 2 shown some sort of clear interest in the Falcone family beyond trying to rob them, and she's been very cagey with telling Batman what it is, and we sort of finally figure it out right before those explosions start going off, as she reveals that which is a reveal that happened in the comics, though it didn't happen in the Long Halloween specifically, which was that Falcone is her father, and that she doesn't know her mother's name, and that really all she wants from him, she doesn't want to be part of the family, she doesn't want really anything from him but just to learn her mother's name. And so as Batman and Catwoman sort of begin to gel together more as an actual team, as less of just this sort of flirting fancy and pulling each other out of the fire, and actually begin to work together. That sort of coincides with all of these explosions and yes, the super criminals of Gotham City, all of them except for Calendar Man, because he didn't get the coin flip right. Which I don't think they ever expressly say that scene is right out of the comic as well, of all of the cells are empty except for Calendar Man, and I don't know if they ever expressly say it's because he got the coin flip wrong or not, but that's a really great bit there. But they have sort of this final assault. It's big, it's dramatic. You have Poison Ivy and Penguin and Joker and Two-Face and Batman and Catwoman all sort of facing off with the mobsters and Falcone's daughter, who I think is way more of a physical presence in the book as well. Like, she doesn't get as much to do in this movie. She's a little bit hard done by. And again, I think a lot of that could be chalked up to time and and runtime and things like that. But yeah, but they're all sort of mixed up together, and as it begins to wind down, Two-Face kills Carmine Falcone, and that's sort of, and then voluntarily gives himself up to Gordon and Batman. So you have this sad moment as Falcone's dying. He and Two-Face begins to get away. Batman and Falcone and Catwoman are speaking, and he looks at Catwoman with her mask off and says the name of her mother, and so she does get what she wanted from him ultimately before he passes. And also something straight out of the comic is that as her father is shot, Sophia Falcone goes into a rage and ends up tumbling out of a window and just smacking hard on a car about 30 stories below.
Papa? Sophia, no!
2 bullets only. Sorry, gorgeous.
No. No. No, 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 no!
Sophia! I can't hold on!
So a very tragic and dramatic end for the Falcone family, and as it seems that Two-Face has got away despite Batman and Catwoman stopping all of the other villains. We see the bat signal is lit up yet again, and in fact, Gordon and Batman go to the rooftop and they see Two-Face, who has agreed to turn himself in, as all his work is done for now, at least.
Yeah, we get this interesting conversation where Batman, with all the death that happened, and Batman really reflects with Gordon and Dent, or Two-Face. Dent is dead at this point, they say, and with Two-Face, over whether or not with the agreement that they made between the three of them, the pact, was it worth it? Was it, with all the death, all the murder, all that happened in the meantime, what happened to Dent? We kind of get this, what essentially was used for the Dark Knight, a big basis for the Dark Knight, which was all of this worth it? Was the death, and Gordon says unequivocally, yes, it was worth it. The good guys won. And, I think Batman is left more to wonder, and maybe not so sure, based on what happened with his friend Harvey, based on the number of deaths that happened, the blood that still was running in the streets of Gotham. But there is this interesting line as Falcone is dying in Batman's arms, where Batman sort of reveals to him that he's Bruce Wayne, because he repeats this line that Falcone said to him the night that Thomas Wayne saved his life. Batman repeats it back to him, and he asks Batman directly, "Do you still believe?" And that cuts back to, that goes back to the first line delivered in the movie and in the comic book, which is Bruce Wayne saying, "I believe in Gotham City." And Batman says, yes, he does. So it's interesting. You have this sort of a dual dichotomy here of whether it was worth it. Batman still believes that in Gotham City, but was this plan, this pact between the three of them, was it worth it, is an interesting question. And ultimately we kind of get this nice little feel-good moment at the end where it's once again Halloween night, and just like the beginning of the movie, Alfred is preparing for trick-or-treaters and Bruce is sort of chastising him once again, saying that there's no way that they're going to get trick-or-treaters, that Gotham isn't ready for it yet. And wouldn't you know it, a single family rings the doorbell, and Alfred is gleeful enough to give the child a bunch of candy. And Selena mentions, and she's there with Bruce, mentions that she's happy to see him proven wrong. And that's kind of where we end things, except right before then we have this interesting scene that we talked about before we went on the air, was not really in the book originally, and that is where we get the origin of the holiday killer. Because on the roof, when Two-Face flashes the signal, he says that he's responsible for all of the holiday killings and that he must face justice for them. And but Batman isn't so sure, and we flash to this scene with Batman standing behind the real holiday killer.
Yeah, and we can get into the variations on the book in just a second, but yeah, as it stands, we get the full story, and there were allusions to it a little bit in part one, right before Alberto Falcone is killed by the holiday killer. He speaks about how he had been in love once and he was ready to leave it all behind and start a family, but that his father wouldn't allow him to, and that his father did something terrible to this woman. It's implied at the time, obviously, that he had her killed or something, but we come to find out that that Oxford pin was not Alberto Falcone's. It was in fact Gilda's, and that she had studied there, and that she was in fact the woman that had fallen in love with Alberto Falcone, and they weren't just in love, that she had become pregnant, and that Alberto was very willing to be a father and a husband to her, but that it would have been a scandal for the Roman to have a grandchild out of wedlock, and that it just could not happen that way, and that for those reasons Alberto sort of stood by as his father not only got Gilda out of the family, but took the baby from her womb, ripped it from her womb, and that is sort of implied to be the reason why she is not able to conceive with Harvey, which has been a recurring theme throughout their sort of deteriorating relationship in both parts 1 and part 2. And so we do get the full reveal here that it was not Harvey, nor was it Alberto or anyone else that was perhaps thought of by Batman to potentially be the killer. But in fact, it is Gilda. And as far as we know, Gilda alone was responsible for all of the shootings of the holiday killer. And she sort of explains the whole story to Batman and why she did what she did, and that she has no regrets. And Batman is sort of listens to her story and then decides not to do anything about it.
So, are you going to take me away or just stand there in judgment?
I need to know that Holiday is done.
Not done. Finished. I wonder, how long did he know about me? Is that how you figured it out? Did Harvey tip you off?
He didn't give you up. Not knowingly. But after Maroney was killed, the way he protected Holiday, he must have known then. He was my friend. He believed in me. I should have saved him.
What will you do now? Tell Gordon?
He literally turns his back and says that he needs to. She asks him basically what he's going to do, and he says that he needs to know whether or not Holiday is dead, and she says, "No, not dead, finished." And he just sort of walks off with his back to her. So yeah, it's very interesting, which I guess leads us to, I guess we can start talking about our scores here for this. And we talked about it in part 1. We liked part 1 a lot, but as far as judging it as its own movie, it's hard to do because of the way that it was ended. So I specifically said that I would judge part 2 a little bit more harshly based on whether or not it fits to make its own sort of encapsulated single movie, or if it's relied on this being a whole thing, then I would have to, I can't retroactively change my score for part 1. So this, my plot score might be a little bit more harsh for this. So I did not like that specifically. And I know that's a very big deviation from the book. As we mentioned, the book, it was not solely Gilda that was the holiday killer, was it?
Correct. So in the book, and they sort of condense this into a couple different action sequences, but the sequence where Batman is dressed up as the prison guard or the cop and reveals that he's there as to save Maroni from being shot. In the book, that was the reveal of the full reveal of the holiday killer being Alberto Falcone, having faked his own death and so that he could more anonymously continue to kill these various mobsters and people that he felt had wronged him or wronged his family or wronged the city. And then it sort of, as a secondary reveal, is that Harvey also killed at least some of the people as well, and that it wasn't just Alberto Falcone, but that once the holiday killer had sprung up, sort of that Dent had also sort of donned it. And that's part of the story in the book, I think, is that it's such a simple disguise, right? It's a hat and a overcoat and these guns, and that are pretty easy to buy, and with their register number filed off on them. So the idea is that it could be anyone that had access to $50 to buy the hat and the coat, basically.
Right.
And so the idea that it turns out to be multiple people, I think, really makes sense here. Really made sense there. But they went another direction. For the movie, and then of course the end result in the book is not only were Harvey Dent and Alberto Falcone the holiday killers, but there was a third killer who was in fact Gilda. And similarly to how the movie ends, we do see her burning the holiday outfit and some other evidence in her final shots, and we sort of get her motivation being more in the sense that she wanted to sort of settle down and start a family with Harvey Dent, and felt that as long as he was this crusading DA, that as long as he had this city to save, that he would never really be ready to be part of a family with her. And so her motivation was sort of wanting to expedite the process of cleaning up Gotham City. But they went a very different direction for this finale, which I feel like this is two different conversations. Because one, you've changed and sort of streamlined who the killer reveal is, but then also you have this added point of, in the book, Batman never finds out that Gilda was a holiday killer or was one of the holiday killers, whereas here he does figure it out by the end of the movie, and he still lets her go, which seems uncharacteristic. I mean, I know this is a different Batman. We don't maybe know everything about this version of Batman and what his view on the law and justice is, but most Batman have a rule about killing and cold-blooded murder. Not all, but a lot of Batman across the multiverse seem to have a problem with that. So the idea that he would just let her walk at the end, I thought was, I just it didn't feel right. Like, it didn't feel right to me.
Exactly. Yeah, that was exactly what my feeling was. It's the main issue that people have had with, let's just call a spade, the Zack Snyder Batman, was that he was so willingly to use, the Batmobile had guns, the Batmobile was killing people right and left, he was a killer. Like, that was the whole basis sort of for the Batman v Superman movie, was that Batman had turned into this menacing killer that was unafraid to sort of cross that line. We've seen different versions of that. Even, you've pointed out several times on the podcast here that one of the things that you didn't necessarily care for in an otherwise pretty great movie in Batman Begins was that Batman doesn't out and out kill Ra's al Ghul in that movie, or Ra's al Ghul, or whatever you want to call him. But he does choose to let him die. So there's a gray area there. He's like, why is that not very similar? Yes, you're not pulling the trigger, but if you know that this person's going to die, if you don't save them, are you guilty by association at that point? But this, in a very similar way to me, if Batman at all compromises that need for justice. Like that's his motivation, going all the way back to his own parents being killed. His parents' killer was not brought to justice in most universes, in most multiverses. That was the whole thing. And he's seeking justice on their behalf. That's the oath he swore to them, with that he would seek justice on their behalf for the rest of the Gotham City wherever he possibly could. And that's his driving factor. Where is the justice for the Falcone family or the Maronis or all of these people that were killed, all of this blood, if you just let Gilda walk? If she is not held accountable, even if she's done, even if the holiday killer is finished, where is the accountability for her for ending so many lives?
Yeah, I think it didn't sit right with me, and I should clarify, in the book, Gilda is the original holiday killer, and then both Alberto and Harvey are sort of copycats that follow her lead in the story. So the fact that she would turn out to be the ultimate holiday killer is still pretty faithful to the book. And I think if you take out the Alberto coming back to life thing and you take out Harvey actually being responsible, I think that's okay. As far as like streamlining it for a comic, I like the triple reveal. I think that's fun, but there's also a part where the reason that Two-Face confesses to all of the holiday killings is theoretically to protect Gilda, because there is a moment that was in the book and it's recreated in the movie where he's sort of sitting in the cell and he just says her name, and the idea being that he's aware that she was the killer, but that he chose to take the rap there, and for whatever killings Alberto Falcone didn't confess to. So you sort of also take that away from the Two-Face confessing to the crimes or admitting to being the holiday killers. The whole thing is, he was trying to protect his wife, who he had sort of figured out was responsible, and in the end he does protect her, and Batman and Gordon never find out. Whereas here it's like again, I just keep coming back to, I think you could have done this and eliminated Alberto and Dent being the killer and have the reveal being that she's the parent. But I did not care for the idea of Batman going, well, she had a real good reason to murder, 8 people or whatever it was over more than that, I guess. There's one for every holiday. So even if they were bad people, I didn't really buy that as like a Batman thing. And again, it's a new Batman. They're allowed to tell unique stories, and maybe this will come back, and there will be a Dark Victory animated movie someday, which is the follow-up sequel comic to this story. But as of now, I found that ending quite lackluster. I mean, I liked the bit at the very end at the Wayne Manor where the trick-or-treaters come up and we get this notion that maybe Gotham is turning around, and maybe there is a little bit of hope thanks to Batman, and Batman's kind of found Bruce has sort of found a little bit of peace in this sort of makeshift family he has now with Alfred, and then with Selina and him, becoming sort of officially a couple by the end of the movie there. So I do like that part of it, but yeah, there's just something that didn't sit right with me of Batman just letting her walk, or at least not. I also think it would maybe be one thing if Gordon was there too, and like Gordon refused to arrest her, and then it's sort of they as this duo, maybe in deference to this pact they made with Harvey, are gonna and Gordon's gonna let his wife walk, and there's some conflict there, but ultimately they agree. Batman and him agree to it. But the fact that Batman knows the real identity of the holiday killer and just doesn't share that with anyone and just lets her walk, I didn't love that.
Agreed. Yeah, that heavily weighed on the score for me. I think the rest of the movie, it's a good tale. I mean, you kind of know where things are going, because if you know any Batman lore at all, you know that Harvey Dent doesn't stay Harvey Dent. They've already, the cover of the movie is Two-Face, so we knew there was going to be a transformation at some point physically to it. I kind of wish they had done some foreshadowing a little bit with the Two-Face voice in part 1. Maybe that would have felt like a little less rushed and abrupt, because it is a very quick descent into madness that we get from him. So that felt a little bit rushed. This does, and we talked about it in part 1. Part 1 was really only 4 of the 13 issues, and so this part 2 had a huge load to carry here, as far as, you know, condensing 9 issues of a comic book into a 70-minute movie or whatever it is. So definitely a Herculean task, and maybe one that they could have maybe cut out some of the stuff in part 1 and made it flow a little bit better, and that way this didn't feel quite as rushed. There are things to like here. I think overall it's a good Batman story, but it just that whole decision to change that and make this a Batman choice to let her walk did not sit right with me. So for all those reasons, and as I said, I have to judge this a little bit more harshly than I did part 1 based on this being part 2. I ended up giving plot a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I went 1 point higher. I went 6 out of 10. I think on its own, it's still pretty good, and it's still feels like a pretty cohesive, definitive ending. Obviously, as we've just talked about for a while here, we've had issues with some of the characterization and some of the condensed storytelling. There's an entire issue with the Riddler in it that just no appearance here. Which again, as I keep saying, I understand that this was already a 2-part movie, and you had to cut some stuff, and that issue, while it's fun, is not particularly important to the overall plot. I also think they lose a little bit of the Father's Day story in the book. It's it does lay out sort of similarly as Bruce is having this flashback to his father saving Falcone's life, but it sort of leaves to Bruce having this sort of breakdown where he sort of has to wonder if his father hadn't saved Falcone's life that night, would everything be different? And Alfred tells him that it's no different than him wondering what would have happened if he had been a different father to Bruce. And so it's this moment where the fathers and the sons are all sort of having this what if thought, and Bruce being frustrated, and then sort of has this kind of genuine tearful breakdown as he tells Alfred that he misses his father, and it's a really, really sweet moment that I wish they could have found time to fit in. But as we'll get to in visuals, you got to have some action, and you got to have him punch the Mad Hatter some. So which I wouldn't have wanted to miss. That is a fun sequence, as we'll get to in visuals in a second here. But yeah, overall, I think it's fine, I think, but there's definitely just some big things, especially in that final act, that just feel like, if you're not going to do that, then you kind of have to do it this way, and doing it the way they did it just didn't feel totally satisfactory. And I guess we should mention in the final thing in plot here, there's a credit scene where Flash and Green Arrow show up and say hi. So
that was definitely not in the book.
Yes, 100% not in the book. This is, I think, based off of the Justice Society World War II movie. Barry Allen's Flash is the star of that film, and at the end, he and Superman, spoiler alert for that one if you haven't seen it, but he and Superman team up, and they discuss what if we got a whole bunch of us together. So the Flash and Green Arrow, I guess, are showing up to recruit Batman into what will be this movie shared universe Justice League or whatever. But yeah, that was a really, really random tack on at the end of what for the most part felt very self-contained. There really weren't any allusions to the wider DC world other than in the kind of art style.
There you go. Speaking of art style, might as well parlay that into our discussion on visuals and animation, Liam. As you mentioned, Edge Animation, once again, responsible for part 2, as it was in part 1. We discussed heavily our appreciation, our enjoyment of the art style in last week's episode. So if you've not listened to that, we don't know why you're listening to this week's episode first. But if you care to hear our whole breakdown of the art style, you can definitely tune back into last week's episode. So saving some time here, Liam, more continued of the same animation styles. So more of the same here for this. We do get some new character models at least brought in here. We get to see Two-Face for the first time. So we get to see him in this art style, but mainly just the same people that we've seen before, with the exception of the introduction of a couple new villains. Also, we get Poison Ivy as Poison Ivy for the first time. We saw her in the trench coat Pamela Isley look at the end of the movie last week. This week we get her in full Poison Ivy persona. We also, as you mentioned, we get the Mad Hatter, and looking a little bit more traditionally like he does in the Alice in Wonderland tale. And then we also get the Scarecrow. And actually, I guess that's where I'll kick things off with the visuals, because the Scarecrow leads us to a very interesting sequence. As you mentioned, there's a scene where he first interacts with Batman, and Batman gets stabbed with a syringe full of fear toxin, which is definitely something you wouldn't have seen on Fox Kids Saturday morning back in the early 90s. I don't think that would have passed standards and practices at that point. So Batman getting stabbed in the ribs with a syringe, injecting himself, or being injected at that point with a fear toxin, leads to this shift where, as the Scarecrow is escaping on horseback, by the way, was that in the book? Was he riding a horse in the book?
He was, in fact, yes.
There you go. Well, also then Christopher Nolan's love or appreciation of Batman: The Long Halloween lives on, as he was also, of course, writing that in Batman Begins as well. So very, very interesting.
Oh, very good.
So yeah, as he's escaping on horseback, we get this sort of nightmare sequence where Batman's fear toxin sort of shifts. And I thought it was interesting because we change art styles in a very dramatic way. We go from the art style that we've been used to for the majority and see for the majority of the movie, almost to something that to me reminded me a little bit more of a Kelly Jones Red Rain style art. I don't know if you got the same vibes or not from that scene.
Yeah, I think they were definitely trying to crib that style, and maybe the idea was they could make it look a little bit more like Tim Solly's style, as far as like the proportions of people's bodies and the shapes, mouth shapes and something like that. But yeah, there's definitely a little bit more, I think, Kelly Jones in it than but definitely that sort of very sort of more abstract and wild style than the rest of the movie is. But yeah, it is, I think, definitely one of the standout sequences. It's more sort of seen to me like fear toxin is like it makes you trip, like it's more of a
hallucinogen.
Yeah, which I feel like, and you see that in the animated series and several other versions of Scarecrow, where people will pop up. There's the memorable dream sequence that he has where the gun, the alley turns into the gun, and then he sees all of the villains and everything. So it's not like we haven't seen hallucinations before, but just the idea of him being sort of stuck in that world, whereas there he sort of sees the hallucination and he's sort of able to shake it off in the animated series, whereas here it's like this waking nightmare where you're really not sure if he knows where he is or who he is, or there's that's part of it, is why he ends up going to Crime Alley, because it's Mother's Day and he's having these flashes of his mother and he's trying to protect her, and he's of course also seeing the Scarecrow and has this very dramatic breakdown in front of this family, not unlike his own family in Crime Alley, who are leaving the movie theater and see him sort of having this terrible episode, and then Catwoman sort of finds him and he's sort of calling out to his mother repeatedly, and she's able to get him home. But that is probably the standout sequence here. There's other action beats, both for Catwoman, Catwoman and Dent facing off with the assassin on the pier on the 4th of July at one point, and then of course the finale there is you also have Batman fighting fighting the Mad Hatter and Scarecrow in the graveyard, which is a pretty fun sequence as well. Catwoman's there for that as well. And then of course you have the big finale where all of the villains team up, and that's a lot of fun. It's always fun when you get a bunch of those Gotham rogues together, and Batman just gets to punch all of them. Like that's a pretty fun sequence near the end there, especially as it sort of escalates. As it starts, it's the villains versus the Falcone mobsters, and then as the villains sort of begin to take over, and then Batman and Catwoman bust in and have to go toe to toe with Joker and Poison Ivy and Penguin and Two-Face. Ultimately, I think that's a really fun and action-packed sequence as well.
Yeah, that was one. The prelude to that, as we have Sophia sort of coming down and doing her best Tony Montana impersonation from the top of the top of the steps there, and there's this sort of all-out gun battle that happens between her with these two gigantic machine guns standing on the top of this set of steps and shooting at the villains as they're all sort of there. I thought that was definitely had to be a Scarface homage, more than likely there, but. I think most of the action, Catwoman gets a lot of action in this movie, and the opening sequence where she kind of saves Bruce from Poison Ivy is an interesting one too, because we get a lot of this plant interaction, a lot of plant and vines and leaves and attacking her, and her trying to avoid them and escape them, and sort of doing battle with Poison Ivy. I thought that was a standout one. Definitely the Scarecrow. I do think that this is the first time, and as you mentioned, in animation that we see this original comic origin of Two-Face. And even though you kind of know what's coming, like you definitely know as Maroni pulls out the little bottle, as Harvey's having this sort of mental breakdown in the midst of the courtroom, and as Maroni has decided he's not going to flip on Falcone, you know what's coming. If you're a Batman fan, you know that this is the moment where Maroni is going to throw this acid. This bottle is not water, it's acid. He's going to throw it in his face, and this is ultimately where Two-Face or Harvey is likely to become Two-Face. But also, I guess part of you was sort of like, we're not sure, because there was a couple of other fake out moments where you thought that Harvey was going to transition into Two-Face in part one, where he has this horrible accident. You're assuming that that his face is going to be horribly scarred, and it ends up not being so. I guess there was maybe some doubt there, but I did appreciate that sequence. That was a very interesting sequence. There's a lot of tension that built up into it as he's having this mental breakdown and hearing all these people laughing at him, and he's hearing the Two-Face voice in his head the whole time. And then when Maroni finally throws the acid in his face, it's very climactic, a very exciting climax to that scene. So yeah, and then of course I think the initial drop that Batman, there's a scene where Batman drops some smoke bombs in the room. I guess that's when they first enter to fight the criminals. And, they're sort of knocking out various criminals, and Catwoman and him are fighting in the midst of the smoke. So you kind of see them jumping in and out of the smoke. And, he grabs Scarecrow's hand right as he's about to shoot fear gas into Catwoman's face, and like breaks his hand and pulls the glove off. And, I thought that was pretty neat. But yeah, there's more action in this part two, I think, than there was in part one, but I still feel like the action sequences are very quick. They're very specific. They're very limited, because there is so much story being told, or that has to be told, that it almost feels like there isn't time for action sequences, if that makes sense. We get a little bit of action for the scene where Solomon Grundy and Two-Face attack the police escort as they're transporting Maroni, and that's a very quick scene. We get Solomon Grundy throws the police car. We get a very sort of Batman, the Dark Knight-esque shot of the police van flipped upside down, and Gordon looking out as he sees Two-Face has arrived there. And we get a quick action beat there, and then it's the tension building of who's going to kill Maroni, and then there's a little bit of a chase, and that's it. And then we got to jump to the next sequence. So the action sequences seem to be packed pretty full. I feel like there's a lot that happens. There's like shaky cam that happens. There's a lot of punches to the face, a lot of violent fisticuffs, but they seem to almost be there to just break up the monotony of the conversation and moving the story forward. So it's almost just like the action beats are used as mini breaks and less like the actual focus of the movie, which I don't think is a bad thing when you're telling a story. That's, it tends to be more like a movie as opposed to, a child's cartoon where it has to have action beats as the main focus.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to see it. Yeah, we can start to get into our scores here. I think the action beats that are there are good for the most part. I don't know that there's anything where I was super stunned by it. Like I said, I do think the Scarecrow sequence is pretty standout. I do really like the Catwoman Poison Ivy fight at the beginning of the movie. I think that's pretty cool and pretty atmospheric. And this version of Poison Ivy, sort of similarly to the Tim Sally artistry, although not quite as horror movie-ish. She sort of seems to be part of the vines in this, and that they're sort of an extension of her, or she's an extension of them. And so like when the vines are cut, it seems to physically hurt her. We see that in the final scene as well, in that first scene. And then just the moment, which is pretty much ripped straight out of the book, which is where Catwoman rips Bruce's shirt open and he's just covered in these vines, and she just pulls the claws out and just slices all of them, slices him free of the influence of the vines. I think that's pretty cool, and that's sort of taken straight from the comics. So I do think there's good things here. I like the designs of most of the villain. I like the Mad Hatter design and the Scarecrow design as well. I think it's like a pretty unique take on the Mad Hatter. I don't think we've seen a version like that, at least not in an animation that I've watched. Where he is this, as you said, he's very much right out of the Alice in Wonderland storybook, where he's this wee little guy who speaks in rhymes and stuff like that. It's a very strange characterization, but it fits very much with this sort of eclectic Batman rogues gallery that we see. So there is, I think, some pretty good stuff in there, and I like that final bit enough. So I ended up giving visuals a 7 out of 10.
Well, what do you know about that? Yeah, I gave it the same exact score. I also gave it a 7 out of 10. And I think that the Scarecrow sequence is the standout one. I think that that's the one that I'll remember the most. Also because it leads into, a visualization of this Batman's parents being murdered. We get an interesting shot that isn't all that different than a very famous Batman Year One cover, where he's sort of sitting there in a spotlight with his parents dead next to him. A very famous cover.
Yeah, the art style of one David Mazzucchelli, who of course was the illustrator on the Year One book with Frank Miller. Yeah, that's the sort of the first issue of that Year One storyline is the very iconic symbol of sort of young Bruce in the spotlight with his, the bodies of his parents laying next to him.
Yeah, so that gave me some of those vibes. So I think there are some good things here. I think there are some fun sequences, but again, I think the whole point of this movie was to be written more like an actual movie that you would go to see. So it's very much more story driven than it is action driven, and the action is sort of there to break up just some of the mundane and just to make sure that it doesn't drag on. So the focus really isn't on the length or the brutality at times of the fights, as it is just that, hey, Batman has to punch some people. So this is because he's Batman. So let's do some punching and have him fight some of these super criminals. So yeah. Some still good scores though from both of us, and certainly looking forward to seeing what comes next in this animation style going forward.
Absolutely.
All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which again is going to be music. As was in our first part, Michael Gatt is once again responsible for the music in part 2. As we mentioned last week, a lot of the music tends to be, because this is written like a feature movie, it is more in the background. I will say I noticed that this, at least for part of the movie, it seemed like that there was more. It's not quite dubstep, but it has like that Inception sound horn thing.
Everyone knows that one, yeah.
You know the sound that I'm talking about, the Inception horn. So there was a lot of that featured in at least early on in the music, and that seems to be the basis of a lot of the music, especially as any time that the holiday killer was seen, or it's more dramatic moments in the movie, or they're chasing the holiday, or whatever. So there's a lot of that and a lot of background music, and sort of just as last week, I don't have anything bad to say about it. There wasn't anything that was offensive. I kind of wish there was more of a Batman theme. I always want there to be more thematic, here's your hero themes. That's what we love. It's what we're used to when it comes to the DCAU. But for all those reasons, it's decent. It's good. I did notice it a little bit more this week with the sound effects, or with those specific sounds. So I gave it a 1 tick higher than I did last week. I gave it a 6 out of 10.
Ah, very nice. Yeah, I gave it a 5 out of 10. So same score as last week. Yeah, I didn't notice anything wrong with it, but yeah, there isn't really a moment where it felt like the music stuck out. And then that very well could be by design, as it is such as we've talked about, a very dialogue and plot driven movie. So yeah, there aren't necessarily as many moments for the music to shine. So, but yeah, nothing wrong with it. I like sort of the more atmospheric moments as Batman's sort of tripping out during the fear toxin sequence. I think there's some standout stuff there. But yeah, overall, a solid job. Nothing wrong with it, but nothing particularly spectacular either.
There we go. Actually, and I just checked, I actually gave it a 6 last week too. So it's the same exact score for me too.
There you go.
Keep it simple. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. Now, we covered a lot of the actors that are featured in this week's and last week's. Some variations, I think, that we should probably talk about here, and a couple of course, new characters were introduced, so we can talk about their performances as we talk about this week's voice actors.
Yes, I'll do them a little bit more rapid fire since we went into depth on a lot of them. We'll obviously talk about the stars of the piece a little bit more here, but yeah, we once again have briefly David Das Malkian as the Calendar Man. We have Billy Burke as Gordon. We have Titus Welliver as Carmine Falcone. We have Alistair Duncan as Alfred. Very, very briefly have Troy Baker as the Joker. I think he only has one line in the
our wishes came true. Remember, we were like last week, we were speculating maybe he's not going to be in a whole bunch in the second part, and you were like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, he wasn't in much of it. He was in it about as much as the Joker is in that final issue as well, so that works out just fine. New to the cast, we have Layla Berzins as Sophia Falcone. We have Robin Atkin Downs, another veteran voice actor, as the Scarecrow. And we, of course, have a man we've talked about numerous times on this show, John DiMaggio, playing Mad Hatter, who, as mentioned, is just this really quirky. He's got like this really Cockney British accent, and he's just speaking in rhymes all the time. And he's this weird, super short little man, and he's just and the best part is probably when he's trying to do a rhyme about Batman, and then Batman cuts him off and just punches him right in the face.
The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it. There. That's the drop. As for the bat, delivering him wasn't part of the deal, so we can do whatever we want with him. What fun. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat. How I wonder what your
business with the Roman. ends tonight.
Yes, that is a very fun moment, and probably the highlight of his appearance. He's meant to be an annoying. He's meant to be an annoying character. The deep Cockney British accent caught me off guard. I will say that. It reminded me kind of the first time that I heard the Penguin's voice in the Batman Arkham game. It's like, wow, that's weird. I never thought of this character as being British, but okay, I guess it works. He can be British. That's fine. And I know Jervis Tetch in Batman the Animated Series had a bit of a accent. Like he has a bit of a, I guess it could be a British accent, but it's definitely a more refined British accent compared to this Cockney, Bert in Mary Poppins chimney sweep type of accent.
Yes, it's very much Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins. That seems to be maybe some of the inspiration there. But yeah, definitely a memorable performance, if nothing else, there from
for sure.
Maggio. But then, yes, finishing up our returning voice cast from last week, we once again have Julie Nathanson as Gilda Dent, who gets a bit more to do, obviously, in this part because we get the reveal that she is in fact the killer. Everything she says is kind of in the same tone of voice, which I think part of that is by design, because the idea is, she's this cold. She has become, because of what happened to her at the hands of the Falcone family, she's this very cold and sort of vengeful and angry and sort of almost emotionless or with very little emotion, a person at this point. And other than the only thing that's really left in her is sort of this rage and want for vengeance. And so I don't think she does a bad job by any means, but I do think it's you don't get the big turn where she reveals herself and she, descends into this dramatic villain soliloquy and really hams it up. She pretty much plays it the same way, and I assume that was by design. With I believe Wes Gleason did the voice direction on this. I assume that was by design, but yeah, there isn't a big dramatic twist once we sort of learn that she's the killer, or even when they have that first scene where she and Batman are speaking at Harvey's house once Harvey goes missing.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it's right for the character. She's sort of this emotionally dissociated person that's had this extremely traumatic experience where the man that she loved and wanted to be with was willing to be with her. They were going to have a child. And then not only was the marriage forcibly ended, was told that she could not be with this person, but then her baby was ripped out of her. If I can't even imagine how somebody would be functioning as a human being, let alone, be the wife of an extremely public figure and expected to sort of act in a normal way unless you were able to completely dissociate yourself. That makes a lot of sense to me for the character itself. So the fact that she is sort of just one note throughout is actually, I think, works in her favor, and I would assume was done so on purpose. It also it draws suspicion away from her being the ultimate the villain in the end. This sort of meek, emotionally hurt, certainly, and we get allusions to her not being able to have children in the first part, but you assume that maybe that's why she's so emotionally withdrawn. And not that she's this murderous person that's been, knocking off members of the Falcone Empire and Maroni Empire at that point, one by one. So yeah, I think it was a good casting choice and a good voice direction to kind of keep it that one note version of a person that's just emotionally withdrawn, because she's a killer. She has to be emotionally withdrawn.
Yeah, agreed. I think she does a really great job there. And then sort of rounding out the cast here, we once again have Josh Duhamel, Las Vegas' own Josh Duhamel, as Harvey Dent.
Not the Mandalorians. However, we did get somebody else. We get Katie Sackhoff, who played Bo-Katan on The Mandalorian. Listeners and she ends up playing Poison Ivy in this in the Long Halloween. So I actually cut it out last week, but I confused Josh Duhamel with Timothy Olyphant. And claimed that Josh Duhamel had played Cobb Vanth in The Mandalorian. So this week we get somebody that was in The Mandalorian. So imagine that. But yes, Josh Duhamel's Harvey Dent, and ultimately the best Richard Mall impression that I've heard in quite some time.
Yeah, at least since Bruce Timm voiced him in the Justice League versus the Fatal Five cameo. But no, that's I think he's doing the Two-Face voice, right? He's doing it almost doesn't even sound like the same person. So unlike. And I think that shows the different types of perhaps neurological disorders that he and his wife are portrayed to have in this movie, where she has become sort of cold and emotionless as a result of her trauma, whereas he has become more, literally he split down the middle, but this vengeful, angry, loud, psychopathic personality has really taken hold in his brain and is sort of the dominant personality now. It's a tremendous transformation into that. And again, he sounds like a lot of other Two-Face actors before him. He's not necessarily breaking new ground in that regard, but as far as a transformation from the Harvey voice to the Two-Face voice, it's tremendous.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, he really pulls it off. And I wasn't so sure, because I felt like his Harvey Dent was okay last week. He delivers lines pretty well. I like him as an actor, as I mentioned last week. His time in the Transformer movies is one of the, I don't know. He's not asked a lot to do in those Transformer movies, as nobody was, but I thought he was fine in the Transformer movies. But this I think solidifies him as he's a great Two-Face. He got it. Like he understood what was asked. He understood the role of that sort of switch that's flipped. Especially, I think, when he begins to hear the voice, the Two-Face voice in his head, and he's having this conversation between, Harvey and the Two-Face personality. You begin to get the true dynamic between the two voices that he does, and it's great. I think it's really, really good.
Agreed. And then sort of wrapping up our voice cast, we do in fact have Naya Rivera as Catwoman once again, as we spoke about at length last week. She tragically passed away in 2020, and will not be able to reprise this role, which as we talked about last week, and again, being a voice in a cartoon is the least of the tragic elements of a woman passing away, especially a young woman that was a mother. It's absolutely terrible. But since we are talking about her in the context of this cartoon, I'll just say it's also a real bummer, because I think she's a really good Catwoman, and I think she and Jensen Ackles Batman, again, we've talked about that, how their relationship and them sort of growing together is so much of the the backbone, or the emotional backbone of Batman's story arc in this film, and those two working off of each other. I think they both did a great job.
No, I think they have a great chemistry between them. It was also great. She also gets a lot of focus on this in this movie. And, we get the storyline again, where she's attempting to sort of find her identity and discover more about her past and, what her motivation is here. And she's a great ally to Bruce. Bruce is sort of reluctant to partner up with anybody at this point, and she is sort of relentless and doesn't take that personally. So I loved it. Yeah, it's unfortunate again, that she's passed, and I think this was a great role for her, and it was a great performance. And unfortunately, it was just the kickstart of what probably would have been a very successful long career as a voice actress. So yes, very tragic that unfortunately we won't get any more performances from her.
Yeah, agreed. And as mentioned, her working with Jensen Ackles as Batman, we have discussed Jensen Ackles' pros and cons as a voice actor quite at length between last week's episode and, of course, our review of Under the Red Hood, which you can also hear in our archives at DCAUreview.com. But yeah, I think he gets the most acting that he's gotten to do, I think, in a voice acting role that we've reviewed, at least to date here, especially I think in that in the fear toxin sequence, as he's sort of continually calling out to his mother and sort of having this complete breakdown as he's sitting in Crime Alley and is sort of calling out to her repeatedly. And I think he does a pretty good job. He's we've talked about this 100 times. A lot of different people have played Batman over the years, and all of them sort of bring their own unique spin to it. But I feel like that scene was maybe where I started to feel like, okay, yeah, this is Batman. Like that moment. Ironically, it's not when he's being grim and gritty and so serious. It's that moment of that genuine vulnerability, as is said in Return of the Joker. It's the little boy in the bat suit crying out for his mommy. Like that's the moment where I thought it really clicked with me of him playing Batman.
Yeah, I think again, I think the best sequence that we get are between his performance and his interactions, not only with Catwoman, but also Alistair Duncan's Alfred. We get another touching moment later on where it's sort of, the flip side of what we saw in the first part. They're again standing underneath the picture of Thomas and Martha Wayne, and Batman's beginning to have this questioning of Falcone and his parents' relationship with the Falcones, and whether or not their legacy, they were so concerned with their legacy that being involved and tying themselves to the Falcone family was worth it. And Alfred really has this breakdown scene where he's like, well, you are their legacy, like you're the legacy moving forward. So you kind of get to decide what their legacy is. And that ultimately is what their concern was. So their legacy doesn't have to be these loose ties to the Falcone family, or the fact that they allowed the Falcone, that Thomas allowed for the Falcone name to continue by helping save Carmine. It can be what Bruce basically decides that it is. So I enjoyed that interaction. There were times actually where I felt like Jensen Ackles was really he had listened to some Kevin Conroy. There was definitely some inflections that he used in some of the scenes where he's the scene where he's interrogating Scarecrow and the Mad Hatter. There were some inflections there that really reminded me of Kevin Conroy. We actually get his Bruce Wayne voice too. We get him putting on like a fake Bruce Wayne voice as he's sort of grilled by Harvey Dent and Commissioner or Captain Gordon earlier in the movie, as they're trying to determine his whereabouts when Falcone's son is Alberto is thrown overboard. So we get a fake Bruce Wayne voice out of him too, which I thought was pretty fun. So yeah, I think he's really, really good in this. I think that we get a lot of he had to carry a lot for this because it is so story driven, and this whole part, while it is very much a Harvey Dent Two-Face story, we get a lot of Batman trying to put the pieces together, and Batman doing this detective and investigative work, and Batman interacting with Harvey and Gilda and Gordon and Selina and Falcone. We get all of these interactions. So I think he had a lot to carry. It's a Batman movie. Of course he did. So I thought voice acting was incredibly strong for this week. I don't know if you have anybody else to talk about, but I figure we can get into our scores here. I thought voice acting was really, really strong this week. Continuing, I actually gave it a better score than what I gave it last week. This week, I bumped my score up to an 8 out of 10 for voice acting. What about you?
Nice. Yeah, I gave it even one tick higher than that. I went 9 out of 10. I think it's a really strong cast, and they have a lot to do. And as we've talked about throughout this, it's so plot driven, so dialogue driven, that it would be easy to feel like it's just a lot of actors doing, continuous exposition dumps, but it never feels that way. And, it always feels like they're doing good acting, and they're doing good acting in service of moving the plot forward. So yeah, great job by everybody involved.
There we go. All right, Liam, well, that will bring us to our final scores for this week, and totaling everything up for me for this week. So for part 2, I ended up with a 26 out of 40, which is a little bit disappointing. Last week's score, I ended up with a 29 out of 40. So this week, not quite as good. And that had a lot to do with that plot score coming down from what I had given it last week. What about you?
Yeah, I'm just a tick higher at 27 out of 40 for myself here. So
also
yeah,
lower than your score last week, which was also
correct.
29 out of 40.
Yeah, which is funny because as much as I think preferred the voice acting this week, or thought that all of the talented actors had more to do this week, I think the plot kind of brought things down a little bit for us. And again, like I said, I guess then we can get into our rewatchability here. If you're a fan of the book, especially like I am, I think this is still worth seeing because they do recreate a lot of specific moments and scenes from that, and I think it's well done. And I think the voice performances are very, very strong in both parts, but especially in part 2. And I think there's enough good stuff here to check out, especially if you're a fan of the book. Will I come back to this 10 more times now that I've saw it, or 5 more times now that I've seen it? Probably not. So I don't know, from the rewatchability standpoint, I don't know how often I would come back to this, but as someone who loves this story and loves that, there's definitely, I think, moments from it that I could see myself revisiting, even if I'm not necessarily sitting down to watch both parts of it back to back anytime soon.
Yeah, I would concur with that. I think it's worth a watch. I haven't watched a lot of the direct-to-video DC animated movies that aren't DCAU stuff. I will admit that I missed a lot of that DC animated movie universe, Tuckerverse stuff. I've not watched the majority of those movies, other than the ones that we've sort of reviewed here. And I watched a little bit of the Reign of the Supermen movie as well, but I will say that I'm excited about more movies within this universe. I may if we don't decide to review it for a future episode, go back and review some of the previous 2 movies that we believe are now tied into this universe here, with Superman, Man of Tomorrow, and then the Justice Society movie. I'm intrigued to see what comes next. Again, if we get a Dark Victory movie, or it seems again like they're very much setting up this Batman Catwoman romance. Are we going to get Batman Bat-Cat movie, The Wedding? Are we going to get something that involves the Phantasm? Some of the more modern stories that they've been telling, which is what the benefit of having that DC animated movie universe exists, is that they are adapting a lot of not only some of the classic storylines, but some of the newer storylines as well into movie form. So very excited about that. But I don't know that this is one that I'm going to go back and watch again, especially since it's a 2-parter. It's a lot of investment to watch. And I didn't, there are parts of it that I just didn't feel were authentically Batman. So I don't know. Watchability, sure, give it a watch if you haven't seen it yet, but rewatchability, I don't know that I would throw this one on again. It definitely wouldn't be in my top 10 DC animated movies to rewatch, I don't think. So yeah, there's that.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget, you can check out our bonus episodes that we released this week, covering not only Justice League Infinity, which is the continuation in comic book form written by James Tucker and J.M. DeMatteis, that is continuing what would have happened after Justice League Unlimited, but also Batman: The Adventures Continue, which is written by Alan Burnett and Paul Dini, best friend of the show, Monica Kubina, doing artwork for them. You can hear our reviews of both of those, and that is the continuation of what would have happened after the last season of the new Batman Adventures. So lots of fun to be had on your podcast feeds this week from the DCAU review. Don't forget, follow us on your favorite podcast app. Give us a subscribe. If it allows you to leave a review, do so. There's lots of fun interactive things that you can do on Spotify. If you listen to us there, we put up polls every week about whatever our discussion topic is, about our movie. We ask you some questions. You can feel free to do do that. If you wish to support us, you can subscribe to us there, leave a podcast review on your app. You can subscribe to the Pod Tower YouTube page. That takes 2 seconds, and not only do you get content from us, but you get content from our friends at Tim Talk and the Watchtower database as well. And you can also support us by, if you want to buy some merch, head over to DCAUreview.com where you find our full archives, but also you can get a hat, shirt, mug, t-shirt, something to support the pod. There's also a link at the bottom on your favorite podcast app that says support this podcast. You can do that. Shout out to Sam, who's been messaging us and supports us and comments on all our stuff and just sends us his money every month. Just nice dude. We're like his compassion.
Thank you.
Or something like that. Great dude. But Liam, we are in a new month of November here. We typically start with a new series once we turn the calendar page, but we had this two-week break here where we wanted to do some Elseworlds talk, cover both parts of the long Halloween. But now that we are in November, we are going to head back to the DCAU proper, and excited to begin a new series of reviews with you.
That is right, and we will be returning to the city of Dakota as we will be once again reviewing Static Shock for the rest of the month of November.
Here we go. It's been a while since we've been there. Excited to head back and do some Static reviews. Static, of course, I don't think he's ever been more popular, maybe when he had his own cartoon, but than he is right now. Lots of exciting stuff happening with Milestone. Static's got his own monthly comic book back again. We're getting a Milestone animated movie coming out. Who knows? A live action Static movie is still supposedly being produced. So lots of good time to be a Static fan. So excited to catch up on some of those old cartoons, Liam. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.